All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Just like Rhonda said, thank you all for coming and being here today with us and joining us. I'm Kim Relaford. Rhonda Henry and I are both work-life connections therapists here at UK. As we're getting started, if you wouldn't mind typing your full name into the chat box so we can keep attendance, we'd really appreciate that. And then throughout our time together today, you are welcome to use the chat box to ask questions, share your thoughts or ideals or suggestions. But just please know that we have a really high amount of registrations today, so we're probably not going to get to your questions, but we will use those questions to kind of think about what we want to cover in future offerings. So please do share those. You're also welcome to come and talk to us in more detail about some of these things as well. So today's training is actually part 3 of a 4-part series. You know, relationships are part of all human interaction. And in session 1, we talked about family relationships. In session 2, we spent time on friendships. And today we're going to be talking about romantic partnerships. And all 4 sessions are being recorded and will be available to you in the near future if you want to go back and look at these, or if there's somebody you think would enjoy or get something out of the video, they will be there for them to do that. And also we'll be sending you all out a copy of the PowerPoint in a week or so everybody will have that. Next slide. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about and discussing the importance of both individual and relationship visions and values. We're going to talk about what the healthy relationship foundation looks like. We're going to talk about connection and communication and its importance in relationships. We're going to talk about managing conflict. And then at the end, we're going to provide resources so that you can explore these in more detail. Throughout the presentation today, you're going to hear us talk about these resources that are available to you. Those are, again, going to be part of the PowerPoint that we send out with live links, and we will share that and look at that a little bit closer when we get there towards the end of today's hour. Okay. Next slide. All right. So before we really dive in, we want to start by talking about and clearly define what we are going to address today and what we're not going to be talking about today. So first, an intimate relationship is an interpersonal relationship that involves emotional and physical closeness. It may also include sexual intimacy and feelings of romance or love. So that is what our definition of romantic partnerships is. Healthy relationships involve honesty and trust and respect and open communication between partners, and they take a lot of effort and compromise. There is no imbalance of power in these partnerships. Partners respect each other's independence. They can make their own decisions without fear or retribution or retaliation, and there's shared decision making within the relationship as well. That is the focus of what we're talking about today. What we are not talking about as far as relationships goes today is where there is an imbalance of power. Unhealthy relationships are often characterized by power and control issues. When one partner is taking the power away from another in order to have control over that person or even the relationship. This is when you begin to see unhealthy dynamics in a relationship and also abusive tendencies. And the abuse could be emotional, psychological, physical, verbal, or sexual in nature. And if you're experiencing this kind of abuse, although we will not be spending time on this today, we wanted to provide you with an immediate resource through the federal domestic violence hotline at 800-799-7233. You can reach out for local and confidential help using that 800 number. But we also are going to provide a few resources at the end. And again, you all are more than welcome to come and talk to us about any of these issues, and we would be glad to help. So now, Rhonda, I'm going to let you take over and dig into today's information a little bit more deeply.
Thanks, Kim. I really appreciate that. All right, y'all. For folks who have been to a couple of the earlier sessions, you may have heard us talk about this framework of the North Star. So I think, again, when it comes to our romantic relationships, kind of coming back to what keeps us centered, what are our values, that idea of North Star being that sort of fixed point, so even as circumstances change, these are the kind of visions for who we want to be, how we want to be in relationship. So with our romantic partner relationships, it may be looking at questions like some of these. What do I consider to actually be a healthy, satisfying partnership? What kind of partner do I want to be? Y'all, that's going to be a theme. I'm going to give you a sneak peek into the next hour is what things do we need to work on ourselves to be able to show up and be the partner that we want to be? And so we can all get off track, at different times. How do we use that North Star kind of come back to a grounded place? In my values, it's really important to me that I'm authentic or that I'm really respectful to my partner. And if I'm kind of veering from that, how do I come back to that vision? What are those top values? Just like before, we've got some values activities that are in the resources that we're going to be including and sending out to you all. So if that's something you haven't really thought a lot about or thought about it in relation to actual relationships, this might be a good time to kind of dig into that a little bit. And then looking at really how much of a priority is a romantic relationship, at this chapter of life, and kind of where does it fit into my bigger life goals, life demands, that sort of thing. But I think these are some of those good, really grounding questions, just to kind of get vulnerable and honest with ourselves about as we sort of think about where we want that romantic relationship to be. All right, so let's talk for a moment about sort of this framework of red and green flags. And I'm not going to read through each of these. You all can read those details in each of the bullet points. But a couple of observations that I want to throw out there as we sort of think about this framework of red and green flags. I think in general, as we're looking at things like green flags, we've got, I don't know, six or so, examples there. You could list another 20 examples of things that could fall into that. What I find though is that green flags tend to be kind of rooted in respect and reciprocity. There's mutual responsibility, there's mutual benefit, mutual respect, being able to feel safe, being able to be ourselves. And so, again, we might have lots of examples of those kind of things. And I think it's good sometimes to have those examples, especially if we've not had a lot of relationship experience or if it's been kind of rocky and we're really looking to kind of shift how we're approaching our partnerships. Being able to identify some of those green flags, what behaviors I want to see more of, can be really helpful. I think when we're looking at that red flag check section, a lot of those are much more grounded in, again, you could have 20 more examples there, but a lot of those as a theme are really grounded in power and control dynamics, where you've got, as Kim was mentioned earlier, some unequal imbalances of power. We don't feel like we can be ourselves. We don't feel like it's safe to give our opinions. There may be manipulation. So if things like love bombing are happening, things that feel good in that very moment or could feel good, there may be other intentions behind that, or it may be more complex. But again, I think really in those red flags, we're seeing a lot of things related to inequality, imbalances of power, and a lack of reciprocity. I think the pitfalls piece is, I'm hoping, a helpful piece for us to give a little consideration to as well. And I think this can come from looking at our own history and patterns. Being able to ask ourselves a few of these questions. Again, if we sat down, we could come up with 10 more questions. But I think these can start digging into some of those aspects that maybe is coming from, again, some of our own history. That might be the relationship role models we grew up with. It might be past partners we've had, or some of our, experiences in relationship. But really kind of getting honest with ourselves, do we find ourselves tending to be drawn toward kind of problematic people or situations? Are we feeling like we're a fixer? Is other relationship baggage getting in the way? We're going to talk about that a little bit toward the end, and some of the things that we might need to address. Are we making choices in alignment with our values? If we're finding ourselves feeling some internal conflict, it might mean some self work needs to be done. And sometimes a lot of times we can be making choices based out of fear. So that might be fear of being alone, fear of having, I'll have a lot of clients come in and see me individually and they'll talk about, I don't want to have a second divorce. I thought that was a one-time thing, like this was going to be forever, and really struggling with how that kind of runs up against sort of their values and their commitment they made in the relationship. So being aware if some of these personal pitfalls are kind of giving you a different lens that you're maybe looking at behavior through early on in relationships or as problems are going on. Oh, give me a second, you guys. I lost the PowerPoint. There we go. Are, Kim, can you give me a thumbs up? Are you still seeing that okay? Okay, just making sure. Thanks, guys. So, what makes a healthy romantic relationship? For a lot of us, we maybe didn't grow up always seeing great examples of that, or we don't see necessarily examples that we're wanting to emulate. Or sometimes we've seen those examples and we can't figure out how do they do it. They seem to get along well. They seem to be in this for the long haul. I can't figure out how is this actually working. So let's dig into like what actually makes a romantic relationship a healthy one. The framework that I really enjoy for a lot of this material today is John Gottman's work and the Gottman Institute. Y'all, like if you are people who like to dig in and read the articles and see the things and watch the videos, like really go check out his stuff. I've got a lot of his resources at the end of this, but I really think the framework he puts out, he's been in this business for many years, and really Gottman Institute materials are some of the kind of higher standard that we pull in. So that's what you're going to see referenced in a number of the slides I'm going to go over in these next few. So let's talk about this idea of the relationship, the healthy relationship house. So in this house theory, we're going to go through kind of floor by floor, and I'm going to mention just a little bit about some of these, and a couple we're going to go into a little more deeply. So that foundational piece is the idea of building love maps. And this idea of love maps is where we really get to know our partner deeply. This is beyond just the, what's your favorite color? It's understanding like what the historical hurts are in their life. What places they might feel insecure, where their joy lives, what their hopes and aspirations are. That idea that we know that partner as deeply as somebody can know another person because we really have that curiosity. We want to have that understanding because having that understanding prepares us to be in relationship together. Sharing that fondness and admiration. This is a space where we want to be able to articulate why we love our partner. So, this is going to be a chance to focus on affection and respect, expressing that appreciation and respect. I think one area that I see sometimes folks really kind of fall into a pitfall around this is when they sometimes get caught up in some of those relationship kind of stereotypes or tropes. And we have all heard them. It's the stereotypical woman who shops too much and spends all the money. It's the stereotypical man that he can't even change a diaper. Those kind of things. And us, even in a joking way, repeating that or among our friends or our family, teasing around there, putting that out there, it can sometimes really start to chip away at how we're looking at our partner and what our respect is for them. If we have an issue with our partner and something they're doing, we need to address that. Like we're going to talk about conflict management in a minute. But if we're buying into those sort of background stereotypes about how we think about, either men or women or different types of partnerships or different types of gender identity, if we start thinking of our partner just through that lens, it really can shift how much respect and admiration and care we have for them. Looking at number three, 4.3 is this idea of turning toward, building these small connections. This one we're going to talk about in a little more detail in the next couple of slides. But the point I want to make with that one in this slide is I think often we look for, when we are thinking about kind of our big relationships and our big challenges in those relationships, we often are looking for kind of big splashy solutions. There's going to be this one thing I'm going to pull in and it's going to make it all better. If we can solve this one problem, all the issues would go away. And what reality tells us, what research tells us, what Gottman studying couples over years and years, of marriage or relationship, tell us is it is these small recalibrations that really make the meaningful difference. These small points of connection and turning toward each other, that's where we really see the benefit. So we're going to dig into that one in a little bit more in the next couple of slides. Let me go on to floor 4, which is that positive perspective. That's part of kind of seeing the good in each other, assuming good intent. And so being able, not kind of rushing to feelings of criticism or feeling on the defensive. So again, if we're wanting to build that healthy relationship house, that's one of those things that we want to invest in, kind of seeing the best in each other. Doesn't mean that we're not addressing conflicts if they come up, but that our underlying sort of baseline is assuming the best in each other. This piece of managing conflict, there's a few different parts that come into this. Again, we'll talk about this one a little bit more in detail as well. But for this slide, a couple of things that I want to note around it at this point. One of the things that Gottman kind of breaks out is this concept of solvable versus perpetual problems. We're going to dig into that in a couple of minutes, but I think being able to see the difference between those is going to be helpful. Being able, when we're looking at conflict management, kind of a baseline in that is we want to acknowledge that there is impact for both of us on any kind of conflict that comes up. So one partner may be the one kind of driving the discussion. We need to bring this up, we need to deal with it. But anything that is involving the couple is going to have impact on both. And so even that acknowledgement, this may feel like my primary issue, but there is impact on my partner or partners, depending on what those decisions are or how I manage it. We also need to be able to have our own personal skills to self-soothe. So we're going to talk in a little bit about, how to do conversation timeouts, things like that when we're doing conflict management. But when we are in difficult conversations, we need to be able to take responsibility for managing our own emotions in that. And that might look like we get into a heated discussion and it feels like it's building and emotions are getting a little bit bigger. I may need to step away for a few minutes. I may need to go stand outside for a few minutes. I may need to go to the other room and take some deep breaths or get a cup of water, something to bring my emotion down a little bit, let my thoughts settle in just a little bit. For most of us in all types of relationships, if we are going really quick, in those interactions, if we are saying and doing things impulsively, often that's a spot where we can get off track. We can say things maybe more harshly than we intended to. We can focus in on areas that are really not the point of the conversation. So being able to step back, do some self-soothing, be able to get our thought and our emotions more in a more manageable place is going to make that problem solving, that conflict management much more productive and less personally hurtful to each other, less potential for that to come in. Another part of that healthy relationship house is the idea of making our dreams come true. We're kind of in this together, so that might be life goals we're working toward. That might be talking about and sharing our hopes, our aspirations, what we value, what kind of things we want as a couple. And so being able to work together in those. So again, it may be that we're working toward one partner's goal around their career, but we're working together to make that plan so that we can make a move or that we can invest time in the way that we agreed to. And then that creating shared meaning, that seventh layer that's in there, really is a mirror of the first layer. So that building love maps is getting to know sort of your individual that you're in relationship with, so your partner's needs and backgrounds and understand them. When we're in that space of creating shared meaning, this is where we're kind of understanding and building who we are as a couple. And so this is kind of our vision for us as a couple. It may be sort of myths, narratives, stories, all this stuff that makes us us. And it's kind of, I like to think of it as like your couple culture, you know? So us as a couple, here's how we do things. You know, in this family, we do this way. And so being able to see again those individual sort of experiences that make each of us up, but then also looking at that couple culture can be beneficial. And then within each or within all of this, within the healthy relationship house, we've got those weight bearing walls of trust and commitment. When we don't have trust, when we don't have commitment, when those are in doubt or when we're in a struggle around those are going to be really big issues. They're going to be hard to keep these other pieces in place. So all of these parts kind of work together to form both that foundation and those kind of deepening layers of connection with our partner. Let's talk a little bit more about this bid for connection piece because this is related. Remember, this goes back to that, I think, the third floor. So, this idea of bids for connection, it's these small moments when we or our partner are looking to connect with each other. And again, it's not that sort of big, flashy, like, okay, we've got to come have a big conversation, or I need to talk to you about the greatest thing that ever happened. It's not that. It's these little small comments. So I gave some examples in here. It might be, maybe when I see my husband tonight, I'll say, like, yeah, I had that presentation today I was talking about. And he could respond a couple of different ways to that. Let's look at this one. So if he's turning toward me in that bid for connection, he might say, oh, really? I know you're looking forward to that. Tell me how it went. He's engaged. He wants to know how my day was. This turning away might be like, okay. He acknowledged me. He didn't completely ignore me. He acknowledged I said some words, but he turned away. He was not engaging. He was not looking for more. And then when we get into the kind of red zone, we can actually see that sort of turning against, whatever. Can't you see I'm working? Whatever. You've been talking about that all week. I'm glad it's over. There was no engagement, no acknowledgement. Think about these small interactions because this, you all, this is where we are in these make it or break it moments with our partner. This is when we feel seen and heard. And again, I think we can get into that sort of almost romanticized vision of like there's going to be this big grand gesture. There's going to be this big moment that we have these heart to hearts. And there may be big grand gestures in your relationships. Those are lovely. But most of the time, it's these small interactions that are really going to speak to the health of the relationship and where we're feeling seen and connected. And the research around this is strong. Gottman, in this piece in particular, Gottman followed newlywed couples over a span of 6 years. What he saw at that 6 year mark, you can see it here. Couples that were still married or still in partnership were turning toward each other 86% of the time. Couples that had split were turning toward each other only 33% of the time. Like as one number that really points towards something that can have a big impact. I want us to really think about that. Looking for those bids in our own relationships. When do I put those out there? Do those get acknowledged? Does my partner turn toward me? And also thinking about your self-work. Are you picking up those things? Are you grounded and present with your partner when they make those bids for connection so that we can take up that opportunity? All right. So some practical connection ideas. I'm going to let you all look at this for a second. I'm not going to talk about each of these. I want to highlight a couple of these, but lots of different ideas. Again, we could put 20 more ideas up there, but it's good to kind of think of some new ways to connect with our partners. A couple of ones I'm going to comment on just kind of at the bottom that have little stars beside them. Doing things like a photo scavenger hunt. So like that's just one that I came up with our family, where we pick a thing. For Pride Month, we did rainbow stuff, and so we sent each other pictures of rainbows throughout that week. It doesn't matter what the thing is. What matters in those situations is the connection and the effort, showing up, finding a way to have silly connection. I love those, like when you see faces in inanimate things, you see the set of screws on a door and it makes a face. I think those are hilarious. I send those to my partner all the time, whatever those are, but finding those small in the day, throughout the day ways to stay connected. Doing things like shared gratitude practice, this is a really beneficial one on a couple of levels. So we know the research is strong around gratitude practice and how much that really can shift just negative thought patterns, how we're kind of internally functioning and interacting with the world. We know that's a good thing across the board. Sharing that with a partner does a couple of things. Remember, back in the healthy relationship house, we want to kind of elevate those things that we're paying attention to in terms of things we're grateful for, things that we have respect for or we admire in some ways. Doing that as a couple is a really beneficial thing. So being able to share, here's my gratitudes today. What's yours today? It doesn't even have to be that we're talking about each other, but just sharing that headspace, being able to think about things through a different lens. Gratitude practice does not mean everything's perfect. It means that even in the midst of a hard day, even in the midst of struggle, sure, I'm really glad this thing came up. I'm really glad I had this opportunity. And being able to do that as a couple really helps elevate both of us and let us focus in on some of those things. And then just spending time in the same space. Sometimes we're doing our own hobbies. One person's reading, one person's playing games on their computer. We might be doing, projects in the yard together. We're not necessarily doing them together, but being in that same space, sharing space together, it just helps us kind of get in rhythm with one another. So again, even if it feels like really low key, I don't have a lot of energy, I don't want to do a lot. Maybe I'm going to read my book in the living room and my partner's going to, do a puzzle in there, and we're just going to be in that space and share that together. So looking for some things that are maybe outside the box of what you typically do. All right. Looking at some tools for connection. Some of these are a little obvious. A couple I want to point out in more detail. So maybe in podcast clubs, I think those are really good, especially if we've got any sort of long distance. We work different shifts. It's hard for us to find time to come together and really focus on things. These are things we can kind of do on our own, but then we come back together and, Friday nights we're going to have dinner and talk about our book we're reading or whatever's going on. Looking at online tools, one of the resources that I've got in the back of the program that you'll be getting is a link that's got some of the online tools in there. So like one of the apps that I know, like we use, my husband and I use is the Parrot app. So it gives you some prompts, it asks questions, it's kind of built in some games, some fun things that you can do. So again, if it feels like, okay, I can't come up with, what to ask or do or how to do more of this, I want more connection, look at some of those apps or some of those kind of tools that might give us kind of a prepackaged way of getting that ball rolling. Couples journaling, I've got again an article in the resource section about this. This can be really beneficial, especially if you like writing, if you and your partner like writing, to be able to share thoughts that way. It's a good way to go back and be able to read past things you've written to each other. And also, if you need a little more time to maybe get your thoughts together, or you want to sit with an idea before you just sort of blurt out that first thought, journaling is a good way to share some of that. Setting aside some time, this idea of like ruts versus routines, couple of things I want to mention about that. I think those things can go from a routine to a rut really easily, and we kind of know that. And so, a couple ways to sort of safeguard that because routines are good for us. Routines for most of us, whether that's in our individual self care, whether that's plans as a couple or family, it's helpful for us to have routine things in place. But we don't want to get into a place where it feels like everything feels really dull or we don't do anything new. So, a couple of thoughts on ways to kind of keep those on track and make sure they're still kind of working for us. I think is to make sure one that it's intentional. If there's something we're going to choose to do, let me give you kind of one example. For my husband and I, it's a Friday night. Like Friday nights, we're exhausted from work. I don't understand people who work all week and still have energy, but that's another story. But we're exhausted. We don't want to go out. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to put out much effort. So that's our low key, get carry out, watch a movie at home, super chill night. We've talked about that. We both like that. But if we do that the rest of our lives and we never check in about it, might there be a day that becomes kind of a rut? Might there be a day one of us gets bored with it? Absolutely. So let's make it intentional. Every once in a while, check in. I've noticed we always do this Friday night thing. That works for me because I'm exhausted. Does that work for you? Okay, cool. Is there something we want to do different? They might say, yes, every once in a while I'd like to go out. Okay, maybe every month or two we pick a night and go out. And so then we can negotiate, we can be present to it, we can choose how do we want to do this? Does it still work for us? And so to me, that lets it stay in that space of kind of healthy routine versus it's the default. We don't get a chance to talk about it or think about it. All right, let's talk about team meetings next. So this is another Gottman idea that I love, and I know Kim and I both use this idea a lot with our clients. It honestly, I think, is one of the best strategies, and it really hits on, thinking of that healthy relationship house, it hits on many, many points that are kind of listed within there. So the idea of a team meeting is y'all, like this is just how I explain it to my clients. So it's how I'm going to explain it to you all. I think of it like a healthy staff meeting. So in a healthy functioning staff meeting, we've got some standing things that we always talk about. We've got some space for kind of new projects, new ideas. We're asking who needs help and kind of is there anything else going on? And in a healthy staff meeting, everybody's prepared with their parts. We're showing up. I got my notes. I got this thing I told you I was going to bring back. We're there and responsible to each other. So if we bring the same kind of idea into our romantic relationship or our romantic partnership, setting up a routine time to talk about some things, in my opinion, it works well when you really highlight some of those things that are difficult to talk about. For many couples, that's going to be money, sex, division of chores, and kind of what's going on this week, what I need help with, that sort of thing. Those, if we can check in about those things on a routine basis, it does a couple of things for us. For the person, well, let me back up. It does a couple of things for us. So it, for the person who is more ready to talk, in any partnership, any two people, I don't care who they are, there is going to be difference. There's going to be somebody who likes something a little bit more and somebody who likes it a little bit less, even if both mostly like it and agree to do it. So we can both be on the same page. We've agreed to do these weekly meetings or these team meetings, and we can still have it be that one of us is a little bit more ready for that. So for that person that's ready for it, it's letting them know, okay, hold your horses. Come Saturday morning, we've got our team meeting. We're going to have breakfast and talk through what's going on. And they aren't having to feel that urge constantly and having to fight that urge to want to bring it up or to feel like they need to push the issue because you've got an agreed upon time. For the other person who might be more hesitant, might be more, just struggle a little bit more to have some of these conversations, it also gives them the chance to get their thoughts together and also to kind of be on point, okay, come Saturday morning, we're going to be talking about this. So whatever work they need to do, that partner needs to do, whether it's do some journaling, whether it's get their thoughts in order, whether it's talk to their therapist, but they can get themselves in order to be able to come to that meeting and have a conversation where we're both ready to dig into something that might be easy to talk about, it might be hard to talk about, and it might change from time to time. I think being able to do this, it lets us kind of build our tolerance for talking about difficult things. Using those examples, just that I threw out a second ago, let's sort of pick money for a moment. Talking about money and finances for many couples is really challenging. A lot of folks have baggage around this. It wasn't really displayed sort of growing up. They didn't see how to do this. They don't feel really confident in it. And it often is a space where a lot of arguments can kind of blow up pretty quickly. If we get into a place where this is on our agenda every week, we're talking about this at our team meeting. And every once in a while, there might be a hard conversation, but a whole lot of weeks, it's just things are fine. No unexpected expenses this week. We're good. We're in budget. Next week it might be, yeah, so and so has a birthday. We're going to have to spend a little money for a gift next week, but otherwise it should be a normal budget. It makes it so much easier to come back to these difficult topics because then we've had a little experience doing it in a way where I didn't hurt my partner. They weren't mean to me. We were able to kind of get on the same page or make some progress on a goal. Remember that kind of life goals piece that we want to be working on. And it lets us tolerate that uncomfortableness in little bursts. We step away from it, we come back again next week. It also lets us turn toward our partner. When we have difficult things to talk about, it's really easy for us to withdraw. Many of us, again, don't necessarily want to do it when we're thinking about it, but that's what we find ourselves doing. And so this is a way of turning toward our partner, seeking understanding, being able to share ideas, that sort of non-defensive listening. Okay, we're just talking about this, we're just hearing what's going on. And that idea of responding with empathy, even when we're in disagreement, even if we're in a place where money is tight and we're both stressed about it, being able to acknowledge that and support each other in that. Where again, that's why I call it a team meeting. It puts us in the space of being a team. It's us figuring out this issue or figuring out this problem. All right. There's also an article in the resources related to this that goes into a lot more detail. So let's talk about some of these challenges that'll come up. We kind of alluded to them in the team meeting idea as a strategy, but let's talk about some of the things that we can run into. So this is that framework that I was referencing earlier within the relationship house of the solvable, perpetual, and gridlock problems. And I really think that just this framework and being able to think about things this way, and honestly, this framework, this piece of it can apply to all kinds of situations. So work situations and friendships and all sorts of things. But I think really being able to distinguish between, are we talking about a solvable problem, something that's in the here and now, there is a solution, we've just got to think it through, be willing to spend money on it or time on it or whatever that is. And we're able to address the conflict without there being really deeper meaning that we're digging into. It's just, we've got to solve this thing. The idea of perpetual problems, meaning things that we keep coming around to. So this might be all couples are going to have perpetual problems. I mean, they just are. All relationships are going to have some of these. And it can be sometimes a little difficult or confusing to know that, like, one issue for one couple could be a solvable problem, and for another couple, it could be a perpetual problem. Okay. So you may be seeing in your circle, I see other couples deal with this, or I see people on TV deal with this, or whatever you're taking in. Why do we keep struggling with this? Well, because in your couple situation or your relationship situation, this may be a perpetual problem. And this may be something that's rooted in childhood issues. This may be rooted in something that's blown up and been a painful thing in your relationship. It may be, let me give a good example. Um, so say that there's been, I don't know, infidelity that a couple has moved past. So for them, having a partner who is maybe overly attached to a phone or overly checking messages might feel like more of a perpetual or gridlock problem than just a solvable issue. For a couple that doesn't have any of that baggage, and they may just be irritated that their partner is constantly picking up their phone every time they sit still, that may feel like more of a solvable problem. So again, there's going to be dynamics, and we're not going to be able to, again, unpack all of those different examples in this part of the discussion. But I think the important takeaway there is knowing what the conflict is does not necessarily put it in the category. How you all experience it is what kind of puts it in those categories. So if we're talking about a solvable problem, how we're going to approach finding a solution is going to be different than if it's perpetual. And if it's a perpetual issue, what we're going to be looking there is how do we manage this? When this comes back up again, because we know it's going to come back up again, how do we talk about it? Do we put it on our team meeting agenda so that we're checking in every once in a while? This is it that big? Is it a thing that we have a conversation about? How do we talk about it? Okay, it drives me nuts when you pick up your phone. This has been a thing we keep coming back to. How are we going to talk about that in the future? How can I approach this? And how are you going what are you willing to commit to or to do differently? So how we dig into the problems is what shifts when we recognize what role those problems play in the relationship. Perpetual problems can become gridlocked, and often that's been when there kind of has been mishandling of those over time. It can start to feel like things just feel pointless. We're just kind of circling around and around. And when we get in those gridlock problems, that's when we might need to look for some outside help. That might be a time for looking at things like their couples therapy, bringing in, potentially depending on how serious it is, but bringing in books or other resources like that that might help us kind of get unstuck from some of that. But I really think being able to think about this framework can be beneficial, and can help us from just getting stuck in things, and feeling like, again, we've got just one solution for all types of problems. I think it's helpful to look at, is this a recurring issue? And if it is, how do we approach managing it together? Really relying in on that teamwork. Like, how do we do this together? It keeps coming up, and we don't want to keep finding ourselves just back in the same space over and over. This, y'all, like, this has a lot of words on the screen. So I'm gonna give you a second just to look at this. This is another Gottman piece. And in this part, he kind of clusters these different areas that can come up as we're trying to manage conflict into sort of these four horsemen ideas, these four things on the left, and really trying to see that, like, when these come up, because either or both partners or multiple partners can be bringing these things up or stepping into this. And to the right, he's got some ideas of how to help sort of bring some neutrality to that. So let's talk through sort of the four horsemen and what that looks like. So one of those is criticism, that idea of really attacking somebody on their personality or their character. So again, kind of contrast that with our earlier talk of the relationship house, that healthy relationship house. We're looking for the parts of our partners that we respect, that we admire, that we look, that we have value in. When we start shifting toward criticism, when we're in conflict, and that's part of what comes in, whether it's pointed toward us or we're pointing it toward our partners, it is breaking folks down on a personal level. We're getting into personal attacks. We're not talking about the problem. So Gottman's sort of shift there is to look more at his idea of a gentle startup. And again, if his stuff resonates with you, I can't strongly enough recommend digging into the Institute or some of his books, because there's just a lot of good content in there. But this idea of gentle startup, being able to express things from our point of view, being able to express a positive need. I do better when we're hanging out together. I am at my happiest when you're not on your phone, and when I really feel like I'm kind of getting your attention in those moments. Can we work on this? That feels really different than coming from that critical place of, why are you always such a jerk? You can't even sit here and pay attention to me when I'm trying to talk to you about something important. you know. So when that criticism comes in, big red flags. This idea of contempt, and again, these I don't know that they're four distinct things as much as they all kind of flow together, in my opinion. But this idea of contempt, attacking that sense of self with an intent to abuse. So again, name calling, putting our partners down. That again, that is balanced out by that culture of appreciation. It doesn't mean we ignore the things that are not going well, but it means that we also kind of stay centered on, why am I with this person? Why do I want this person to be my partner in this life? And so we come back to that appreciation, looking at those positive qualities, looking at that gratitude practice. Defensiveness, we all know how quickly defensiveness can spark. I mean, and it's true for all of us. Really putting ourselves in that space where we're feeling attacked and we're not taking some ownership of what's going on, in the situation. So that's that balancing piece, is how do we look at responsibility? How do we look at our partner's perspective? And sometimes that can be a real challenge. That's where, again, some of those strategies, those team meetings, or having some of these conversations where we really take time to invest in understanding our partner's point of view. That does not mean I have to agree with it. But if I don't understand it, I'm going to flip into defensiveness so quickly. It's going to be really hard for me to get a more nuanced understanding of what their point of view is. And so I've got to take time to slow down, to bring my internal barriers down a little bit so I can actually hear what they're saying. Then the idea of stonewalling, withdrawing, we talked about that earlier, withdrawing, pulling back. It conveys that distance. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be a part of it. And what we've really got to be able to develop, I think, as we're managing conflict and being active in conflict management, is that ability to self-soothe. And self-soothing literally means those examples I gave a few minutes ago: walking into the other room, standing outside for a few minutes, taking a cold drink, giving ourselves a few minutes to breathe, listening to some songs. For some people who need activity, it might be going for a quick walk around the block. Like, I need to get some of this out because otherwise I'm going to say more than I'm going to say things I don't want to say, or I'm going to be the partner I don't want to be. So understanding when you are in those moments, when you are feeling that overwhelm, how do I get my emotions back down to an even space? Because if I can't get a little more steady, I not only can I not express myself, but I certainly can't hear my partner and understand other points of view during that. These four areas, I mean, these really hit on the major issues that can come up when we're getting off track in conflict management. If these resonate for you, I can't say enough, like, really to dig into this a little bit. Again, articles and books are in the resource list. But I think, if this one resonates, it's a good space to really dig into and develop some deeper understanding. So when we think about those differences, I referenced this a little bit earlier. Any any two or more people are going to have differences in how they experience different things. And these are just a couple of examples I pulled up because I'm a visual person and I like a visual representation. So keeping in mind that even if we're similar in certain ways, we're both big introverts, we like to be home all the time. One of us likes that a little bit more than the other one. Being able to acknowledge and understand, that's part of that understanding your partner's story, that building the love maps. But it also can really help us when it comes to some of the challenges that we face. So if we see some resistance in some of these areas and we are going to do a team meeting, maybe this is one of the pieces we need to bring to that. This, for again, this couple, if this is sort of the map of some of their differences, if we know that one has super low social energy and one's got super high social energy, we're going to have to figure out how to compromise some around that. How are we going to work with that so that those needs are both getting met, but we're doing it in a way that is not pulling our partner in and expecting them to fix it for us? We're taking our own responsibility, but we're able to support each other. We're able to acknowledge that. Let's talk for a minute about our sex lives, because y'all, like I'm telling you, people come into therapy and it's hard for folks to talk about. And it's a challenge for a whole lot of us. And that can be because of a whole lot of reasons. So if we've got differences in sort of our sex drive or sex interest, we know there's a lot of things that can impact this. For some folks, there may be health issues or medical issues going on. For some of us, it's just chapters of life. If you're a partnership that has children involved and you're raising little kids, that may be a really difficult challenge to sort of find time and energy for everything that needs to get done. If you're in a caregiving stage in life, if you've went through, a really rough breakup and you're in a new partnership, all kinds of things can really put a lot of pressure on our sex life. And how we talk about it, if we talk about it, how we address it, it's just all over the place. Like, it's one of those things that for a lot of us, it's really difficult, even with our partners, to break the ice, to be able to say, this isn't working for me, or this isn't the way that I would prefer we be doing this. Often, because those relationships are so valuable, we have such deep value in this partner that we have, partners that we have that fear of saying the wrong thing. of unintentionally doing something that's going to hurt their feelings or be a criticism, we also may be struggling because things that we aren't wanting to say to our partner. We may not be expressing that we don't have the same desire we used to, or we don't feel things the same way we did. So as we're managing some of those differences in sex drive and interest, couple of just suggestions that can help with some of that. So this framework of dating each other again. So what does that mean? Going back to the basics. How do we spend time together in ways that feel fun and engaging and sexy and silly? All those things that kind of spark that connection earlier on. So are there ways we can kind of turn up the volume on that? Also, kind of being honest with ourselves and our partner about needs and preferences. Those can change over time. If we're in long-term relationships, what we felt on, month 3 and how we feel in year 3 and how we feel in year 33 might look really different. And that doesn't have to be, again, a critical piece or a tear down of our partner. It can be, how do we come back together about this? Talk about a perpetual problem. This is most likely going to be a perpetual issue if it's an issue. So we're going to circle back around to this. How are we going to do that? Well, I like it if we bring it up this way. If you talk to me this way, it hurts my feelings. Being able to give each other some insight. Making time, you all cannot say this enough. If sex is a priority, we got to make it a priority. Like that, it's just, there's no other way around it. And I think, we all live in this culture. We are all subject to some of these sort of fantasies or ideas of there's going to be this spontaneous time. I don't want to have to plan a date night. I don't want to have to plan sex. And you certainly can approach it that way. And like, you certainly do not have to plan any of that. But for most of us, we're working jobs, we're raising potentially kids, we've got animals, we've got houses. We are trying to do a lot of things. And it's really, really easy for sex to get put on the back burner over and over again until it does become a rut and we aren't finding that we're getting that connection we need. So if we want to prioritize it, again, the way one person prioritizes it and the way another couple prioritizes it may look very different. But if we aren't talking about it, if we aren't elevating it a little bit, it's going to be really easy for it to get put to the back burner. Setting the tone, looking for those ways to build intimacy. I hear this from folks all the time, that, they can't just sort of turn it on immediately. If we've been disconnected all day, if we've been in low key bickering all day long, it is not going to feel like sexy time just because it's 11 o'clock at night and the light is out. Like, it's just not. And so if we are not finding ways to connect to each other in small ways, they do not have to even be sexual or intimate ways, but just small ways to build connection throughout the day, it's going to prime us to want to be connected to our partner in whatever way that looks like. And then if this is a perpetual problem, if this is something that just feels like, yeah, we've tried to wrangle this and can't get our arms around it, this is a time to seek some help. There are lots of good professionals out there, whether that's through therapy or a doctor, depending on what the circumstances are, even doing things like bringing in books or things like that, where we're being a little more intentional. Okay, we're going to really dig into this a little bit more and see if we can work on this. Emily Nagoski has a couple of great books around sexuality and sexual desire. I've put both of her books as well as her podcast in those resources at the end. Just can't say enough. Very science based and great, great information. Okay. I think, anytime that we're facing conflict, we're going to find a better chance at growth and getting unstuck when we're able to also ask ourselves some pretty vulnerable questions. And you'll have heard this theme, in a number of ways today. We want to be in partnership and we want to often we look to our partner and want them to do certain things to show up. But our most, what's the word I'm looking for? Our most kind of fertile ground for change is when we look internally. So being able to ask ourselves things about, what's my part in this conflict? Am I expecting somebody to guess what I need? Am I articulating what's really going on? Am I falling into some of those 4 horsemen behavior? I look at those, y'all, just like everybody else. I look at those. I know where my vulnerable spots when I look at are in those 4 horsemen. I know the ones that I go to when I'm not at my best or when I'm, feeling really elevated and I don't have my emotions kind of in check. Really thinking about what personal work we might need to do, to be able to show up and be the partner that we want to be. And there's a lot of vulnerability in that. And so I think acknowledging that, and again, that might be a space where journaling is helpful. It might be a place where if you've got a trusted friend you would have that kind of conversation with, or coming to see a therapist. But sometimes having another way of processing some of those can get us unstuck. All right, let's look at some communication tools, because we know with all relationships, all variations we've talked about over the series, communication is such a core component of that. So a few of these we've talked about in more detail in past sessions. the importance of practicing the pause and how to do that, active and reflective listening, even that kind of standing times to connect. We talked about that a little bit earlier, even in this one. I want to hone in a little bit on the bottom two there, the timeouts in conversation and the won't, willing, or want, willing, and won't. So let's talk about these for a minute. And y'all, these are just on the same slide because they're two communication tools. They are not interdependent. So this idea of the I want to, I'm willing to, and I won't. I love this framework, and I'm going to give you an example that I'll kind of pull that together in a second. But I love this framework that we can talk about ahead of time. So this is something we agree to talk about. It might have been in a team meeting. It might just be a conversation you have. Yeah, I saw this presentation. I thought this was a good idea. And we've agreed to it ahead of time. It allows our conversation and our communication to be more authentic. And it allows space to acknowledge mixed or difficult feelings. So let me give you an example of a time that I think this is just a good one. So say that my cousin has a wedding coming up, and I'm asking my partner if they will come to the wedding with me. And we've agreed ahead of time that their choices when they are responding to a request are I want to do that, I'm willing to do that, or I won't do that. And my partner in that situation says, I'm willing to do that. I know that it's not his first thing he wants to do. I know it's not. It's really not my first thing I want to do. It's a thing we need to do. It's a cousin I love, and we need to go to the wedding, and I really would like my partner to be there with me. And in that situation, in those circumstances, I am willing to take the answer of I'm willing to. I don't need him to want to do it. I don't need him to be real excited about it. I just need you to go and be nice to people. And I know for him, in my experience, that's what he'll do. He'll show up and he'll be nice and he'll be really happy to get back home after it's over. In another request, maybe I'm wanting to do something, maybe I'm wanting to take a trip for our anniversary. And I throw out this idea. I think we should do a quick little weekend getaway for our anniversary. And he says, okay, I'm willing to do that. In that situation, for me, that might prompt me to need more discussion because maybe I don't want to settle for something that you're just willing to do. Maybe I'm hoping for something because it's our anniversary. It's the two of us. We're both invested in this. I want something you're excited to do. And so let's go back to the drawing board. It allows space for communication that is more authentic and gets us where we want to go. In that situation with the cousin example, the husband doesn't have to pretend this is the most exciting part of his weekend. He doesn't have to be a jerk about it, but like he can just say, yeah, I'm willing to do that. And willing to do that means I'm not going to be a jerk about it. I don't need him to embrace that and like take that on as his most exciting thing. But I think being able to have these options in space as we're having these communications, it lets us head off some of that passive aggressive sort of response we can get and some other problematic communication. So if my husband in the cousin example had to say, like, yes, I'm super excited to go to this wedding, and he doesn't really feel that, what's he maybe doing in response? Maybe he's stomping around all afternoon leading up to it. Maybe he's running late getting ready because he doesn't want to go in the first place. And he didn't have an opportunity to say to me, I'm not crazy about doing this, but I'll go because you want me to go and we'll have an okay time. If we didn't have that, then you see those outlets of more kind of passive aggressive behavior. You can see other problematic issues. And I just think it's such a small strategy to use or tool to use, but I really think it can be beneficial, again, depending on your communication style. All right, the conversation timeouts. We may have referred to these some in some of the past sessions, but a couple points I like to make about these. Again, this is one of those frameworks we want to talk about ahead of time. We want to know what this means. So if you know that that's something you need, or you notice that's something your partner needs, or maybe you ask it as a question, do one of us need this? If we need this, then we've agreed ahead of time. Okay, what does this mean? It means I'm walking away to self soothe, to clear my head, to settle those emotions like we talked about before, maybe to gather my thoughts so I'm not impulsively saying something that I'm going to regret or that's hurtful. And we know that whoever kind of calls for this timeout, and you can call it a timeout or you can make up some silly name for it, whoever calls the timeout is expected to bring it back in. Okay, so if I needed this few minutes to step away and gather myself, then I'm going to let you know, okay, I'm ready. I'm good to come back together. Or give me 10 minutes. I'm kind of setting a framework of what I need. I think having a plan to come back together is a really important part of that. And so again, how much time you all give, how you do that is up to each kind of individual couple's framework, but being able to articulate what those expectations are, being able, if you're the one who needs the timeout, being able to say, sometimes I just get really overwhelmed and I just need a minute to go take some breaths because I want to say what I really mean, or I want to slow down so I can actually hear what you're saying. Talking about where that's coming from. It's not, I'm walking away because I don't care about this, or I'm walking away because I don't want to hear your point of view anymore. It's I'm walking away to take care of myself so that I can come back into this conversation. Again, understanding how to regulate those emotions, and then knowing that if we're able to kind of be present and not have all that emotional overwhelm, we're going to be able to hear each other, not only express ourselves better, but be able to hear each other as well. So boundaries, for folks who've been to past sessions, this is the same boundary slide we've used before. When we're talking about boundaries, I think, in romantic partnerships, I think it's a good thing to remember that both of these tools we talked about are ways of setting boundaries. Being able to say the I want to, I'm willing to, or I won't, that lets me set boundaries. It gives me permission to say, I won't do that. Maybe, use that cousin example for a second. Maybe my cousin was a real jerk to my husband years ago. Maybe they said horrible things to him and made him super uncomfortable. And maybe his response when I ask about this wedding is, no, I won't do that. They were a jerk to me then. I will not go and be in that space with them again. Okay, then we'll need to deal with that or negotiate that. But when we think about boundaries, both that sort of I want to, willing to, won't, and conversation timeouts are just really practical ways of setting boundaries within those conversations. So, how we love ourselves is how we teach others to love you. How you love yourself is how you teach others to love you. Let's shift for just a moment and really talk about a couple of things that can sometimes get in the way, some of our own personal baggage that can get in the way. So, in any relationship, any romantic partnership, all of us are going to bring baggage into those. Like that is an unavoidable situation. We have lived life, even if we are in our first serious romantic relationship, we have baggage. We have baggage of who we grew up around. We may have baggage that we didn't see any couples that we really felt like were great examples. And so we're going to bring some of those things in. The fact that we have baggage, there's no blame in that. There's nothing negative about that. It's just acknowledging that these experiences we went through are going to inform and influence how I function in this partnership. And if I don't want those to kind of take over and take up sort of this disproportionately big space in that partnership, I need to do some self-work on that. And that might be all these things. So, fears around cheating and infidelity. If we've had that experience before, it can be really easy to bring that in. If folks who may have experienced past sexual trauma, we know that is a really difficult thing for us to kind of manage and work our way through, and that may take some time. So we want to have some space to do that. Where again, our current partner can be supportive, but it's not their responsibility to work through that for us. One that I see a lot is just the struggle to trust our own judgment. Especially if we've had some relationships that have went, in a way that we didn't like, we might start kind of doubting, can I pick a good partner? Do I know what a red flag is? Do I understand, when criticism's coming up or when I'm doing certain things? So being able to acknowledge some of those things and do some work around that. Certainly family of origin issues, our own health or self-care needs. If things are getting in the way of our sex life and we know it's some of our health things that are unattended to, maybe we're taking responsibility for that or working on that. Looking at established communication patterns and challenges, the reason this one is under our own baggage, I'm saying that in reference to things we're bringing in from the past. So this might be established kind of poor communication from family of origin or from past relationships, but things that you feel like you're bringing in. So even if a partner is really not doing those same things, you may need to kind of work on some of those parts. Certainly, if we're finding ourselves with some problematic alcohol or drug use, that's going to get in the way of our relationships. That's going to have an impact on how we're able to be in partnership. And then fears, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection. If those again feel like they're front and center, if they're kind of driving decision making, if they're driving our inability to bring up problems or our inability to sit down for a team meeting, that's a good indicator we need to do some individual work. That's a time to come talk to somebody like me or Kim or a doctor or your other therapist. But that's a place where, again, working on some of these things can allow us to build that relationship house in the healthier way that we want. And I think when we've got some old wounds that are there, being able to acknowledge, with self compassion, but, there are times that we've all probably hurt or let others down. I've not been perfect in any relationship I've been in. And so, how do I understand past mistakes or missteps? And I don't have to use those to beat myself up, but how do I do those to seek more understanding? How do I identify what I want to do differently? I notice certain patterns. Who I want to step back from that. I don't want to find myself in that painful pattern again. If we're seeing some of those patterns show up, identifying some of those themes. If it's my inability to communicate and bring up stuff about money always gets in the way, well, I really need to find a way to address that. I need to find a way to do some work on that so I feel more secure and grounded in that, and it's not going to become an unintended problem in this relationship. Getting that other perspective again, whether that's therapy or religious faith support, friends, family, but being mindful of who we're getting that support from. We all know I have a large circle of friends and I love them. I know the friends are going to hype me up and I'm mad about something and they're going to help me get 10 times madder. And I know the friends are going to help me get some perspective. and help me maybe call me on some of my stuff and help me maybe find a little more balance. So being mindful of that. Who do we talk to about this? How do we process it? And anytime we're seeking that understanding, really bringing in self-compassion, because it's easy to beat ourselves up around these issues, and that doesn't really move us anywhere in a positive way. All right, Kim, I'm going to turn this back over to you to wrap us up.
Thank you, Rhonda. So that was a lot of really good information, but we also know it was very quick. And so we wanted to make sure that you had these resources available to you where you could like dig deeper with with this information. And so again, this will be part of your PDF, but we have some podcasts on here and some books to look at and some articles as well. Go ahead to the next one. This is just a wonderful picture of the four of us, and we really want to encourage you. I'm losing my AirPod. We really want to encourage you all to come and visit with us if you would like to explore some of these things further. Go next one. And the way that you can make appointments with us is you can use this QR code, which will take you to our website. We provide 5 free sessions a year for any UK employee, sponsored dependent, or retiree. There's also a phone number here you can call if you're struggling with our website, because we know sometimes it's a little bit fickle. We also provided you with the UK Individual Relational and Financial Therapy, or IRAFT clinic. They offer actual individual and couples counseling as well, and it's $25 per sessions for households of UK employees. They also provide a relationship checkup that you can go in and have a one-time appointment with them and really kind of deep dive into what's going on in your relationship, where you're at, and maybe some goals you have for yourself. So that's another resource we wanted to offer you as well. Of course, we have some other UK resources and links here too. Okay, Rhonda. So overall, I just want to say thank you and for joining us. Our part 4, we're going to look at work and professional relationships. You can register here for it if you haven't done so already. And that'll be our part 4 and the end of our series. So we really hope that those of you all have been to all of them will come back for that last 4. And also and if you haven't been to any of them, you're welcome to come to that one as well. I was also looking at the chat. I'm sorry. And somebody asked if you're both UK employees, if you both get 5, and that is true. Each employee gets 5 sessions. Sorry, I got a little bit sidetracked. And yes, we will be getting these PowerPoint slides out to you in the next week. But thank you all. I really appreciate your time today, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, guys.